I want to welcome you to this launching event of the Practical Guide on Remote Interviews. My name is Jeroen Jans. I'm head of the Asylum Processes sector here at the EUAA. And we have now, for this launching event, participants from 22 member states around the table, and also a colleague from the European Commission who has joined us. We are at this moment working on quite a number of practical guides to get ready for the preparation of the PACT implementation. And as we speak, actually, the EUAA Management Board is coming together and will discuss the adoption of another practical guide on legal counseling, which we hope to be able to publish soon. We gave priority to this practical guide on remote interviews because the Asylum Procedures Regulation explicitly tasks the EUAA to develop guidance on remote interviews. And while remote interviews is an important tool for any administration to be able to dispose of, it's also clear to all of us that the APR does put limits as well on its use, limits on the circumstances in which it can be used. In-person interviews remain the standards, legally speaking, but also in practice, most case officers do prefer to conduct interviews in person. There are nonetheless circumstances in which the tool of remote interview can make a difference and can help us to avoid that asylum procedures become unnecessarily lengthy. And as we will see today, the practical guide also speaks about that part on how to decide in which circumstances a remote interview is appropriate. We know that remote interviews can be of good quality. We know that from member states reporting to us. We know that from our own operations, where we monitor the quality of the interviews. Good quality is possible when the right attention is paid to putting the necessary safeguards in place, using the required skills, and having also the necessary technical support, which allows us to reach standards that are similar to the in-person interviews. As with all the practical guides that we develop with the EUAA, we don't do this on our own from our island in Malta, but we do this based on the experience from member states of good practices that have been developed, in particular during the COVID-19 situation. And the guide was also written together with member state experts who were part of the working group, and of which two are with us today and who will present with us the practical guide. I hope you will make good use of the guide and of the tool of the remote interview as such as well. Maybe on a practical note, I need to mention that this session will be recorded so that we can make it available to the national contact points later on, so that they can show it to police who could not attend today. With this, I'll pass the floor to my colleague Daniel, who will guide you through the development process of this guide, the legal framework, and the structure of the guide. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jeroen, and apologies in advance to everyone. I managed to pick up a little bit of a cold, so my voice is not optimal, but I hope you will still be able to hear what I'm saying today and presenting this guide. So first of all, warm welcome to all of you joining this meeting this morning. If we can go to the next slide, please, Alessandro. Thank you. We have today's event, as Jeroen mentioned. We're going to go through the guide, a bit the history of why this guide, and to introduce you to its content. So myself, my name is Daniel Krabbe. I'm a senior Dublin officer with the EUAA, and I'll speak a bit to the legal framework and the development process for the guide. Then my colleague Joachim Makis will be going through the technical and procedural standards parts of the guide. And then Tanya, our expert from Portugal, will be going through a bit the process of deciding on whether to conduct a remote interview. And then finally, Lynn, our colleague from Norway, will be presenting the interview techniques that you can consider in particular for the remote context. So if we go to the next slide. We thought we'd start a bit from the beginning. So what is an EUAA guide? So EUAA guides, as Jeroen mentioned, are developed by experts for experts. So we work very closely with our national counterpoints in the member states, in this case, both in the network for asylum processes and in the Dublin network, as remote interviews are relevant both for the APR and the AMMR implementation. Our guidance attempts to promote the good practices, of course, that has been developed throughout the member states in Europe, and provides practical assistance to case officers, process managers, and others that are involved in implementing the common European asylum system. Of course, as well, the guidance should hopefully promote some harmonized practices across the member states. And we're very keen, of course, as well, to take into account the differences between member states. So not to be too specific, we know that you all have different operational realities that you're working in. So we're trying to keep that in consideration when we're doing this. Also to say what the guidance isn't. So EUAA guidance is not legally binding. We also don't provide any independent interpretations of the legal framework. That is, of course, for the courts to do, and perhaps as well for a bit for the Commission colleagues in Brussels. And we do not include any detailed standard operating procedures in the guides because, of course, that would require to give more, let's say, detailed explanations of that would depend more on the operational setup in each member state, and they're supposed to be applicable across the member states. So a bit about the development process as well, so you know a bit more of how this this product has been developed. So at the beginning of an EUAA guidance, there is always a working group. This time we were very lucky. We had a fantastic working group with national experts. So we had Tanya Marques from Portugal, Lynn Krane from Norway, but are both with us this morning. And also Emily Wikström from Sweden and Stephen Hand from Ireland that participated very actively and helped us with developing this guide. So the experts, together with the EUA, developed through meetings, through consultations, this draft guide that goes through several steps. We've also had a lot of very good feedback and input on the guide from the colleagues at the European Commission, which we're very grateful for. And then the next step in the development is the review of the guidance in our networks. So in this case, as I mentioned, both the Asylum Process Network and the network of Dublin units of the agency. And this is, of course, so that all the member states, and not only those who have managed to have experts supporting the development, but so that all the member states can put forward their thoughts, their comments, and their ideas for the guidance. And then finally, it's reviewed and adopted by the management board of the agency, which happened earlier this year. And so where can you find the guide? So you can find the guide on the EUA website. It is publicly available, and we are currently working on translations into French, German, Greek, Italian, Polish, Romanian, Slovak, and Spanish. Those translations are currently being quality reviewed, and we're expecting them to be finalized by the end of the year. And we can provide the link as well, I think, in the chat to the guide in case any of you are having any troubles to find it. So why guidance on remote interviews? Jeroen already hinted at this. So both in the APR and in the AMMR, there is a direct request from the co-legislators, so from the Council and the European Parliament, for the agency to provide this guidance. There's also quite a bit of rules in the regulations that set out a bit the key fundamentals for the remote interviews. So this is a bit of a novelty in the APR and in the AMMR compared to the current legal framework that we're operating under. So what are these key principles for remote interviews? So the legislation sets out that in-person interviews are still preferred to remote interviews, which should remain the exception. Remote interviews are optional for member states, so it means member states are of course free to do them, but member states aren't obliged to conduct remote interviews. And also conducting remote interviews has to be grounded in clearly justified reasons and follow an individual assessment to evaluate whether the remote format is suitable for the specific applicant. And member states should also apply the same procedural safeguards for remote interviews as they do for in-person interviews in order to ensure the privacy, the confidentiality, and the respect of the principles of data protection. Member states should ensure that the necessary arrangements are in place for the facilities, for the procedural and technical standards, legal assistance, interpretations, things like this. And obviously, the best interest of the child should be a primary consideration in cases concerning children. So, how did we structure this guide? So, for this guidance, we have started a bit with some introductory words, and then we have a presentation of the legal framework, because we felt that was an important thing to introduce you to the actual legal provision that set the ground rules for this in both the APR and the AMMR. So as I said, we don't provide sort of interpretations of the legal framework, but it's still important to highlight what is there. Then there are the procedural and technical standards that Makis will be speaking a bit more to in a few minutes. I won't go into those in the details. And then there are the considerations that you might have thinking of whether or not to conduct an interview in a remote format. Tanya, as mentioned, will be going through this part of the guide with you. And then finally, there's a great chapter as well, I think, on interview techniques in the remote context, because of course, as a case officer or as someone conducting an interview, there are different things to take into account if you're doing it with the person in person in the room or through a screen, let's say. So also for the interview techniques, we wanted to cover that. And finally, at the very end of the guide, you'll find a few annexes as well with some practical tools that can be helpful for you in your daily work. So with that, I'll hand over the floor to Makis, and you can go. Maybe to say as well, we'll have a Q&A session as well at the end of the presentations. So if you have questions as we go along, please do write them down, and you can put them in the chat as well, and we'll do a bit of a Q&A towards the end of the presentations as well. So thank you very much, and Makis, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel. I would like to welcome you all also from my side. And in this part of the presentation, we're going to go through in some key elements from the procedural and technical standards that you can find in the guide, in the guidance. Before going into the first slide, I would like to mention that when we're developing the guide, we discuss quite a lot the structure and if this part should be here, or first we have the situations on deciding if should go on with a remote interview or not. But we thought that it's so important, the standards, that if administration does not have the standards in place, it's not possible to apply the concept of remote interview. So we thought that the guidance should start with this part. So moving to the first slide, yes, as Daniel also already mentioned something about the procedural standards, these are the legal basis can be found in Article 13 of the Asylum Procedure Regulation and Article 22 of the Asylum and Migration Management Regulation. And what is highlighted is that the same procedural standards that apply in-person interviews, the same should apply and in remote interviews. So whether we have an in-person or remote interview, the goal remains the same, that through this interview should be ensure the privacy and the confidentiality that will allow the applicant to present the grounds for the application in a comprehensive manner. The presence of the legal assistance, legal representative where applicable, the presence of an interpreter that will ensure, who will ensure the appropriate communication between the applicant and the case officer. And also a well-prepared and trained case officer that can conduct remote interviews, and of course the support for applicants with special needs. So in order to be sure that these procedural standards will be in place, the guide provides a series of guidance, of practical tips, how to organize the remote interview in order the standards to be respected, to be met. So we start with the key roles of the different participants in the interview, which have multiple participants and in different locations. So we thought that it's very important to clarify where each actor of the interview should be. So we start with the applicant. The applicant location should be in a secure, suitable environment, in a facility that is managed or approved by an authority. So obviously that the applicant cannot be from their house and conduct the interview from there. On the other hand, for the case officer, it is recommended to join from a dedicated office, so probably an office of the administration that is organized and has the equipment in order to conduct a remote interview. Of course, we don't exclude the option, the case officer, for the case officer to be from their private, let's say, space, but in this case, what we highlight, and we'll see also in the next part, in the technical standards, is that all the standards that we have in a government, let's say, office will be also met if the case officer is from their private space. For the interpreters, as we say in the guide, they should be in a suitable location that is approved by the authority, ideally with the case officer, and we suggest that should be avoided to be in the same room with the applicant, because in this case, the principle of neutrality might be undermined. And finally, the legal advisor, again, it's recommended to be with the applicant, especially when we talk about cases that involve children, but also can be in other locations, however, that they're approved by the authority. Moving to the next slide, we highlight something that we highlight in the guide is the role of supporting staff at the applicant's location. This staff can play a vital role during the interview. These are the people who can provide practical information to the case officer, to the applicant, excuse me, assist with the technical equipment, help with the handling of documents, and of course deal with any situation that might come up during the interview. So they should be there available to support the applicant in case that something happens, there is an interruption or a problem with the technical equipment, etc. And of course, it's suggested to ensure privacy, not to be in the room during the interview with the applicant unless it's absolutely necessary due to the applicant's condition. And definitely, this is an element that can help to foster trust and ensure the smooth conducting of the interview. That's why we consider it a very crucial element. Moving to the next slide, we see the importance of the information. As we say, it's very, very important the applicant to be clearly informed in advance about the interview, about the remote concept that the interview will be conducted remotely. This will help also applicant may potentially to overcome any reluctance that there might be, and also to understand exactly the concept. That's why it needs to be used a clear, plain language to explain this, especially when we have cases of children. But this is the information that should be provided in advance. Also, at the beginning of the interview, it's crucial to explain the applicant through the staff that supports the interview, how the whole situation will work, what happens about the recording, the audio recording, how to deal with technical issues that might come up. And of course, then the case officer will take up and give more information about the steps of the examination, what also the reason for conducting a personal interview. So to help also through this create the atmosphere that we say in order to conduct the interview. So yes, in the format. Also in this part we provide, like in all the guides, we highlight some good practices. And for example, in this part about regarding the communication and the information provision, we say that it's good to provide information in the invitation, through the invitation of for the interview. So there to explain all the about the format and the details and the modalities, but also good practice that we have included in the guide is to provide already in this stage the applicant an opportunity to object, because in this case there will be time from the side of the administration to explain and to reply to this possible objection. So when the applicant will be at the beginning of the interview, there will not be any further delays. This can help to avoid delays on the spot that might happen if the applicant, let's say, has reservations at that moment. Moving then to the case officer and the training, as we mentioned in the guide, even sometimes because remote interviews can have some challenges, some extra challenges when it comes to the communication with to the building of trust, since we don't have physical presence, potentially the identification of signs of vulnerability. So it's important to the case officer who are conducting remote interviews to have extra training in order to deal with this, with the different elements of the remote interview. And as we say, even experienced case officers experienced in in-person interviews still need extra training in order to apply this concept. And for example, we also include a good practice here that new case officers new to this format that they're going for to start with remote interviews, it's good to shadow experienced case officers that have already started conducting remote interviews. And then moving to some more practical issues that the guide also provide tips. It's like the submission of documents or the interview reports. There we highlight the importance of the supporting staff that we said at the beginning. So they can assist with receiving the documents, or at the end of the interview when there is need for the applicant to sign the report or the transcript, to do the printing, the scanning, so to help with all these practical issues that in a remote context they can be challenging. Also, they can help with applicants with special procedural needs, especially when we have applicants with disabilities or illiterate or children. So their support in these practical elements is it's crucial. Moving from the procedural to technical standards. As we say already, we said that the remote interview should apply the same procedural standards as the in-person interview. And that's why the remote setting demands technical standards, additional technical standards to ensure the confidentiality, also to the quality standards for the interview, and effective and clear and secure communication between the different actors. So in order, we move now to the facilities. We go through some technical standards that should be applied in the facilities on the applicant's location, but also in the facilities of the location of the case officer. So to start with the applicant's environment, it's very important there to the administration to have a room that is private, that is dedicated to the interview, that is free from outside noise and interruption, and from possible unauthorized entries, so to prevent these situations. As we said, here we don't have the presence of the case officer, so all this should be been taken care of in advance to be sure that we have these conditions. And of course, it's a room that should be equipped with the necessary ICT tools to support the audio, the video, and the audio communication. Some more elements about the technical equipment. Of course, it needs to be of high quality. They need to support the stable communication. So that's why it should be in place a fast internet connection, cameras that help capturing the upper body views, potential large screens to observe non-verbal cues, microphones that minimize ambient noise. We try not to go into many details in the guide, but still we thought that it's important to include these tips about the technical requirements, because definitely a poor technical setup can really damage the atmosphere of trust, the credibility, the fairness of the process, because it will not help the proper communication between the main actors of the interview. Moving then to the case officer setup, as we say, the location ideally can be office of the administration, but also we don't exclude, if the national context allows it, to conduct the interviews from home, but the same technical standards should be applied. We propose some tips here: the use of headsets, multiple monitors, silent keyboards to minimize distractions, and also we highlight the neutrality of the background, which in an office usually it's ensured, should be a plain wall, but especially when it is a private space, this is something that the case officer and the administration that organize the interview should take care of. We move then to another very important element of the technical standards, and it's the support, which is vital. An ICT help desk should be available during the interviews to assist with the setup. If needed, the setup may already be in place, or at least at the beginning, or possible interruptions and problems that might come up during the interview. And of course, it's very important for all the participants to know how they can reach for help. And additionally, for the case officer, training sessions when it comes to the technical equipment, the use of the technical equipment, and manuals should be available in order to deal with possible problems that might come up during the interview from technical aspects. And finally, a very important issue is the data protection and the security. So there we also provide some tips, some guidance, and we propose the use of video platforms that are encrypted. The use of unique meeting passwords for the interview. Of course, the handling of documents in compliance with GDPR. And finally, where possible, we suggest the authorities to use providers with contract providers with EU-based servers to strengthen the data protection. So just to summarize, in conclusion, the remote interviews present challenges, so that's why they require thorough presentation, the use of proper staff that can support the interviews, clear communication between the different stakeholders of the interview, strong commitment to procedural standard, but also it's very important to ensure the proper technical aspects such as standardized equipments, technical reliability, the offer of support and the relevant training, the use of secure communication platforms. Through all these elements, an administration can ensure the fairness, the trust, the effectiveness of an interview, and of course the integrity of the process, even if we talk about a virtual setting. So this was, from my side, this was the part of technical, procedural, and technical standards. And I will give the floor to Tanya to continue with the decision now to conduct or not a remote interview, depending on the situation.
Thank you, Makis. And I want to thank the invitation to be part of this working group on this guide. And now I will start the presentation on deciding how to conducting a remote interview. So next slide, yeah. When you are deciding, as Daniel already mentioned, it's really important to make an individual assessment of each case, as each case presents unique circumstances that should be evaluated. And this assessment should be made with all the relevant information that is available to the interviewer, because sometimes you really don't have information. So as long as you have some, you can decide. In the end of the guide, also for your knowledge, there's a checklist on for deciding how to, on how to proceed with the remote interviews. That could help you make a decision. I will be presenting it in the end of the presentation. So when you are deciding, there's 4 steps that you should always make sure that you go through. One is ensuring that all the procedures and technical standards are in place, as Maki has already explained. And then step 2, you should consider if a remote interview may be justified. As step 3, you should consider if a remote interview may not be suitable in the individual cases due to some vulnerabilities or special situations. And then you should also decide. So when is remote interviews justified? There are some scenarios where you can organize a remote interview, but this, and I want to make sure that this is understood, it's not automatically implied that the remote interview should be conducted. So some scenarios are if the applicant is in detention or in imprisonment, if the applicant has health considerations, vulnerabilities, is located far from the interviewer, if you have interpreters with specialized interpretation skills that are far away, and in exceptional situations. So this is always based on a careful assessment of each individual cases. These examples that I refer, they do not constitute an exhaustive list. They can be other examples. So next slide. When the applicant is in detention or imprisonment, this can the remote interviews can be considered because the access to the applicant is restricted from the authorities. So in this situation, it's important that you understand if the facility where the applicant is has all the adequate facilities and is equipped with the IT considerations and all the procedural standards, and if the staff can support the remote interviews to make sure that you have a high quality remote interview. These remote interviews can be challenging because if it's in a detention or imprisonment, the applicant can be not trusting so much this setting, but yes, so considering the health considerations, when there's situations where there's risk of transmitting communicable diseases that can difficult the conduction of in-person interviews, remote interviews could be considered as well. So these public health considerations can be related to large-scale events like a pandemic, like COVID, or more isolated local events, like for instance, spread of a communicable disease that has been identified in the reception center or similar cases. In the case of a pandemic, the nature of the situation can justify more widespread use of remote interviews by video conference to safeguard the interest of applicants and the administration staff. So other health-related situations that could be verified to justify a remote interview could be that applicants have a weakened immune system, persons that have recently received or are undergoing medical treatment, or the elderly or person living with a physical disability that would make traveling more challenging, for example. So considering vulnerabilities, you can consider remote interviews or totally avoid them. So where vulnerabilities preclude the possibility of travel of an applicant or make it difficult due to health or family reasons, should be considered. Where the vulnerabilities are such that it may be in the overall interest of the applicant to conduct a remote interview from their house or nearby. For example, pregnant woman with newborn children, or an applicant that provides care or assistance to a relative that is dependent on them. And then in some cases, you should avoid remote interviews. I will go through the avoiding remote interviews in a while. It is important that not all vulnerabilities should be automatically preclude the possibility of conducting a remote interview. So this assessment should always be considering the advantages or disadvantages and be assessed case by case. So considering the location, the applicant being far from the interviewer, there may be situations where the applicant does not have vulnerabilities, but that could be a reason to consider remote interviews. But the travel duration could be very, very long, and so it could be beneficial and efficient to make a remote interview. So the APR refers specifically to applicants that are located overseas, but this could also concern applicants where the reception center is located very far, and the remote interview could be a possibility. So because if applicants are required to travel long distance and stay in unfamiliar environments prior to an in-person interview, this could cause additional stress, which may turn negatively impact negatively in the remote interview or the quality of the interview. So this, in considering the location, the traveling could also be leading to considerable expenses for administrations, and could also cause delays in the procedure. And so it's in the best interest. This could be a possibility too. So remote interviews could reduce costs, administrative costs, reduce travel stress and potential delays that align with the goal of making the procedure effective and more humane. Considering remote participation of interpreters with specialized interpretation skills, when interpretation into a rare language or specific specialization that is unavailable at the location of the applicant, the remote participation of the interpreter could contribute to a cost-effective and rapid procedure. So this is in the interest of all parties. Remote interviews or remotely interpreted interviews could be considered in these cases. Considering the exceptional situations, so if member states are faced with a large influx of applicants in one geographical area, the use of remote interviews could be suitable to make it more efficient, and to make more efficient also the use of existing resources in other parts of member states. Making use of the remote interviews for applicants where this may be justified and for which a suitability of the use of remote interviews has been assessed could make the process swifter and the interview and all the procedures. This could also allow to free up other resources for the in-person interviews when remote are not considered. So when does the remote interviews are not suitable? There's some situations that I would mention. The list is also not exhaustive, could be other situations. So for children, applicants with visual or hearing impairments, issues related to mental health, applicants with cognitive or intellectual disabilities, other types of vulnerabilities, and unfamiliarity with remote communication technologies, and also could consider the special considerations regarding old age, applicants with old age, some complex cases and cases involving claims based on sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics. So case officers should always evaluate all relevant considerations for each individual case, as I said, and any decision should be made with the pros and cons. So considering children, children of all ages should be considered less suitable for these remote interviews. This is consistent with the child-centered approach that ensures that the best interests of the child are prioritized. You should pay particular attention whether the child is supported by their parents or if it's a non-accompanied child. So, because it's so important also to create an atmosphere of trust. In a remote setting, this could be more challenging, especially if you're using visual aids or other practical tools. In exceptional cases, if the remote interview could be necessary, it must be ensured that the child receives adequate on-site support and that the process aligns with their specific needs. Considering the remote interviews for visual and hearing impairment, this could also be a problem, considering poor audio or visual quality may complicate communication, and misunderstandings in both verbal or non-verbal communication could be potential risks. Considering applicants with issues related to mental health, so as I said, considering children, this could also be complicated here to establish a trust and empathy environment. And this, so with mental issues should be more challenging, the remote interviews that maybe should not be considered. Creating a supportive and empathetic environment could be challenging, and for applicants that require more emotional sensitivity or an in-person report. So in these cases, you should always make an assessment whether they could benefit for a more controlled personal setting of an in-person interview. Applicants with cognitive and intellectual disabilities like dementia or Alzheimer's could present challenges as well, like if the applicant and the interview properly understand each other, you should make sure of that. Limitations on the use of visual aids and other tools that could facilitate communication should be a problem, or could be a problem in remote interviews. And as I said, building trust and rapport. The remote format could be more difficult to address the specific needs of these applicants. Considering other types of vulnerabilities, applicants that might be survivors of torture or presumed survivors, trafficking in human beings, applicants who have experienced traumatic events or who are victims of gender-based violence could require particular consideration regarding the creation of an empathetic atmosphere of trust during the interview that could be harder to achieve in the remote setting. These applicants could require additional support that is better suited for an in-person interview. Considering applicants with unfamiliarity with remote communication technologies, applicants who have little or no exposure to modern communication technologies could find remote interviews more difficult or unfamiliar, that can lead to communication issues and make it harder to build trust. When you know, as a decision maker, this beforehand, you should consider the in-person interview. Or if you already know this, also you could be offering a pre-interview orientation session, or a tech support could also help reduce barriers and make the applicant be more engaging in the remote interview. Considering special considerations regarding old age, older applicants may be considered less suitable. This could be because they may face more challenges with the remote communication, because they are unfamiliar with the technology, because they could be with having impairments, cognitive and physical, like dementia, hearing, visual impairments, or other factors. So I've always to understand the reality of the applicant to make the right decision, and that you don't go under risks. Sorry, I'm hearing self-double. I don't know. Maybe someone turned on the microphone. So maybe I can continue. Now I think it's okay. So if you don't have this information, maybe you should consider the in-person interview, so you don't go through any risks on the quality of the interview, and no complications are arising, like rescheduling the interview because prior you didn't have the knowledge. So just for just a note, age alone should not be considered a reason to avoid remote interviews, because you also have applicants with old age that are familiar with technology. So considering complex cases, as complex cases sometimes require a long interview to cover multiple aspects of the applicant's claim, this could present unique challenges to a remote setting. It may require special tools or methodologies to structure the information provided by the applicant, or you have to interview several persons, such as families, and this could make turn-taking more complicated. When you have to explore complex credibility issues during the interview, like if you have if the entity of the applicant is in question, or there are potential security issues or exclusion criteria that might require investigation during an interview. And a note, you should also consider that remote interviews tend to be more exhausting for both the applicant and interviewer, and could cause increased fatigue and reduce the effectiveness of the remote interview, because these complex cases could require extensive dialogue and attention to detail. And finally, considering cases involving claims based on sexual orientation and gender identities and gender expression or sex characteristics, when you are interviewing these applicants with these claims, it is crucial to establish an atmosphere of trust, and important to facilitate the self-disclosure, which is essential in this examination and fair examination of these cases. It's important to note also that many perceived lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer applicants are likely to have faced discrimination and verbal or physical abuse and violence in their lives, either in the country of origin or of transit, or even in the country of asylum. So these cases are definitely less considered for remote interviews. So in the next slide, there's this checklist you can also see in the guide that you can use when deciding for remote interviews. You click the boxes, yes or no, and in the end, I think there's a next slide, so also that you can pass. And when going to the end, you decide whether if your case is to be organized a remote, an in-person, or a remote interpreted interview. So thank you, everyone. I pass to Lynn, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Tanya. How do we conduct the remote interview and keep the quality as high as possible? In remote interviews, we meet, just as heads on a screen like today, and several factors potentially affect the quality of the communication. They've been mentioned: internet stutters, audio cuts, picture freezes. Demonstrating empathy is harder, and it's more challenging to be an active listener. Nonverbal cues like small shifts of posture and expression are easy to miss, making it harder for us as professional interviewers to adjust our communication to the needs of the person in front of us. In the practical guide, you can find several suggestions on how to adapt your interview methodology, your strategies, to the remote format. You can find information about how to adjust preparations, what to remember when establishing a report and providing information, and how to adjust your verbal and non-verbal communication to the remote setting. And the guide also stresses, like we mentioned before, the importance of ensuring that procedural needs are met and facilitating good quality also in interpretation. So let's have a closer look on what you can find. First of all, the quality. The quality criteria for the remote personal interview are the same as for the in-person interview. And for those of you who are not already familiar with the quality criteria, you can find them described in other EUAA practical guides and trainings. You could read the practical guide for the personal interview or the Dublin 3 regulation. And EUAA also offers comprehensive training in the asylum interview method. There's a webinar on the remote interview, and there's also training for interpreters. We use as a starting point for the interview the same structured professional interview method as we do in the asylum interview. 6 steps or phases, where every phase includes several verbal and non-verbal communication techniques that will help you to conduct a professional interview. And this guide builds on the same methodology and standards and gives suggestions and examples on how to adapt them to the remote format. In a standard interview, we prepare physically, mentally, and we do case preparations. When we add the remote factor, also preparation changes. And the guide suggests several additional aspects to consider during preparation. First, we need to make sure that we master the technology. We should check audio, video, and connections well before we start and leave enough time to fix anything that fails. Second, we always need a plan B. We should expect something to go wrong and have a backup procedure ready, a phone line, a clear instruction so that everyone knows what happens if audio cuts or if that screen goes black. Third, we should make sure that the applicant has sufficient support on site. To be able to obtain high quality information, there has to be proper facilitation at the location of the applicant. So check if there's someone there to help if the system glitches, to guide the applicant to a restroom, provide relevant information, or simply just offer a drink during breaks. These are small acts of care that builds trust, but they also affect the quality of the information that you obtain. And plan for extra time. Remote interviews can sometimes run longer due to the technical checks, the explanation, extra breaks, so schedule those pauses and that extra time. And finally, as interviewers, we have the role as both host and leader, a role that becomes even more challenging when we have to make potentially 3 different locations become one safe space. As been mentioned, sometimes the interviewer sits in one office, the interpreter in another, and the applicant in a third. Other times, the interviewer and the interpreter share a room, or the interviewer sits with the applicant while the interpreter joins online. So each setup is different with its own challenges. So during preparation, we should also take into account how the seating arrangement may potentially affect the quality of the communication situation. We know that building rapport, that sense of trust and connection, is one of the most powerful ingredients in a productive interview. And we know that our ability to build that rapport and maintain it is affected by the fact that we meet online. So in remote interviews, we lose out on that informal chit-chat when walking the applicant to the interview room or getting him or her a cup of coffee. So how do we compensate? The guide suggests to allow some extra time just to talk about the neutral topic. Ask, like, today it's really warm here. What is it like where you are? Are you comfortable? Have you been offered something to drink? Questions that can provide you with valuable information and at the same time make it clear to everybody present that you're the host and you're responsible for the interview situation. You can also use that small talk as an opportunity to adjust technical settings and make sure that all participants can comfortably hear and see each other. And you should verify that the conditions at the locations at the applicants are suitable, that the room is okay, that there's no one else present. It happened actually in one of our interviews, it was a couple of years back, that the interviewer in the middle of the interview discovered that the applicant's brother was actually seated in the corner of the room. And he discovered it by accident. So these are types of situations we should do our best to avoid. And from our end, building trust is also about ensuring that the applicant, that information cannot be overheard, and that you're alone in your office. An easy way to demonstrate it is just lifting up your computer or moving the camera around, showing the applicant what the office looks like. In addition to the standard information provided in all interviews, you should consider adding information about why the interview is conducted remotely. Some applicants we know of have had concerns about the choice of format, worrying that the format itself can affect the outcome of their application. You should also inform about how to best use the equipment. Many will have experience with this way of communicating, but not all, so ask, and if necessary, explain how it works, how to sit in front of the camera, how to speak into the microphone. And it can also be a good idea to add information about turn taking. Taking turns when talking is one of these basic mechanisms for interaction that in the remote interview we often miss out on those natural turn-taking signals that can lead to and often lead to overlapping speech and pauses and frustration. So agreeing on turn-taking signals, just like lifting your hand like this to stop if you need the applicant to pause, or signaling that the applicant can continue by showing the palm of your hand, easy signals that improve the flow of the communication. And do not forget to include information about what to do if something stops working. Let the applicant know that it's super important if there are any problem, as soon as possible, let you know or at the facilitator at site know, so that you can improve as good as possible. Research and our own experience shows that the best way to get reliable information is to allow the applicant to provide information freely and without unnecessary interruption. But both the length and the level of detail in the applicant's narrative can potentially be affected by the remote setting. In addition, experience show that there can be more misunderstandings and they can be harder to fix. The guide fills up our toolbox with suggestions for communication tools that will help us to avoid this as far as possible. For example, introduce all new topics. Introductions are signposts in the communication and include information about what you'll talk about, how you should talk about it, and why it's important. And the introduction will help you to structure the communication and to create understanding across barriers in language and culture, and also in that physical distance. Active listening, of course, is key, but it can be more challenging in the remote setting because there's more obstacles to perception and we're more easily distracted. And to demonstrate active listening is important to direct all our attention towards the applicant and confirm that you are listening, preferably non-verbally, because non-verbal signals, a nod or a smile, is often more productive than verbal signals. It's a higher risk that verbal feedback, just a small or can be misinterpreted and become an interruption in the communication. You should also try to adapt your questioning techniques. Keep sentences concise, speak in short sequences, and avoid complex questions. This, of course, goes for any interview, but it's even more important when communicating remotely. In the remote interview, it's also more likely that you will have to communicate about the communication itself to ensure good flow, using meta-communication. So our 5 senses are reduced to 2. We hear and we see. and less things are obvious from sharing the same context, which means that more things need to be addressed verbally. So meta-communication can be used both to explain how to communicate and to resolve communication breakdowns. Summing up is another communication tool that we can use to ensure that everything was correctly understood and to avoid misunderstandings. And we should check our understanding more often in the remote interview. One last practical tip is using the chat box. When you ask for names of places or persons, you can ask either the applicant himself or herself or the interpreter to write the names down in the chat box so that you could easily copy-paste it directly into the written report. One of the drawbacks of communicating remotely is that there's a greater risk of missing out on non-verbal cues. We can try to compensate by making sure that our entire upper body is visible on the screen so that participants can see non-verbal signals, facial expressions, arm movement. And also we should use gestures and facial expressions more actively. The screen kind of takes away energy from the communication, and we have to compensate for this. One interviewer told me that she moves around a bit more in the remote interview just to demonstrate that she's awake and that the camera is still working. And also be aware that bad habits are reinforced or can be reinforced on the screen. So if you bite your nails or if you scratch your nose, all that kind of things are very visible on the screen. And also that goes for lack of interest. It become very apparent on the screen. Eye contact is one of the main building blocks for building trust and maintaining rapport. And in the remote interview, we look at each other's images, but we don't make proper eye contact. And I think that's a weakness in the technology. It's about the placement of the camera that makes it difficult. So we could try to compensate by looking both directly into the camera and also looking at the applicant's face to kind of replicate proper eye contact. Giving the applicant sufficient time to think, concentrate, and come up with an answer is difficult enough in a face-to-face interview, and it's even harder in a remote setting. For some reason, we seem to be more inclined to fill any empty space in the remote dialogue. As an experienced interviewer pointed out to me that there's less room for small pauses and breaks in the remote communication, and she felt that she had to stay focused on the screen the whole time, and making her feel that everything moves faster in the remote interview. It's also harder for us to see and read the applicant's nonverbal signals. So we normally in the face-to-face interview, we use the applicant's gaze, the position in the chair, facial expression, the energy in the communication to adjust to the needs of the person. So what happens, or what may happen if we lose out on this? One obvious thing is that it becomes harder to see signals that the topic is difficult to talk about. And one of my colleagues experienced that an applicant had been crying, like in the middle of a story, had been crying and probably had been crying for a while without him noticing. And this will, of course, affect the communication, the trust negatively. As interviewers, we risk becoming or appearing as less sensitive or less empathic when we don't give the expected feedback because we don't see the signals. So we need to take procedural needs into account. It's been mentioned, if we discover throughout the interview that the applicant has specific procedural needs, we should make sure that appropriate measures are taken and support the person in presenting their claim as far as possible. The guide also stresses that interpreting in the remote context is different from interpreting in the in-person setting. Next slide. And suggests as good practice that the member states should offer appropriate training and guidance to interpreters. So what's the key takeaway from this part of the guide? I think as interviewers, we need knowledge and awareness of how the remote format affects the quality of the information we obtain. And we need the skills to be able to adapt familiar communication techniques and strategies to the remote format. And the guide gives us several tips and examples on what the interviewers can do to compensate and to make sure that the communication and the reliability of the information that we obtain is as good as possible. That was it in regard to interview methods. I'm not sure who will take the floor from here.
Yes, thank you very much, Lynn. Thank you, and Tanya, for this part of the presentations. Actually, now this goes from our side. We tried in this less than 1 hour, we tried to highlight all the key elements of the guide, the different parts of the guide. And of course, the floor is now open to questions. So if there is anything, either you can, as you know, in the virtual environment, you can either raise your hand or you can write in the chat. Meanwhile, we received some questions from the registration survey we have there. Quickly, I will go through if there is anything that we tried through through the presentation to reply to them through the ones that we received from the registration. As I read, one is how to overcome the obstacles and create mutual trust in a remote interview context when technical and other problems exist. I think especially the last part of the interview tried to give quite a few tips on this. Still, if someone or the colleague who submitted it wants to come back or ask something more specific, but I think we try to cover it in, especially regarding the interview techniques. Then another question that I see that was submitted is there different guidance depending on whether the remote interview is done through video call or through sound call? As we mentioned from the beginning, it should be always video call. So it's a video conference. It's an interview through video conference, as we say, between the case officer and the applicant should always be a video. So only through telephone call, the remote interview between the two main, at least, actors, the applicant and the case officer, cannot take place. It's one of the requirements. We also included tips about the interpretation, the location of the interpreter, elements regarding the interpretation in this last part as part of the interview. Okay, about the good tips about the good connection and the setup. I think through the technical, also the guide, there is the technical requirements and the technical standards that we try to go quite deep, I think, into these tips and what to provide. And about if the remote is feasible in case of children. I think already also Tanya in the part of the situation, especially about the children, it was extensively explained what is the situation to avoid or not. The importance of the location of the interpreter and legal representatives also was covered, and how to maintain confidentiality. We also try to provide and practical tips, but also technical tips that can help confidentiality. So I don't know if anything of this has not been replied, but we think we try to cover it to this question. So if there is anything else.
We do have a question in the chat.
Okay, great.
Or a few questions actually in the chat.
Nice.
And they are from Leo and regard extension applications. So as I'm reading it, I assume we're talking about extensions of protection status that is temporary, or if I understand the question correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, persons that apply after having had other types of statuses or residence permits. So the guide doesn't go into that in particular. I think you can still so we don't cover those specific situations, let's say, differently than any other situation. So I think, as with everything, and the colleagues can correct me if they don't agree, of course, that you could take that into consideration as well in the general sort of element to be assessed. But as Tanya was going through the decision on making remote interviews, it would really be a personal assessment in each case, or an individual assessment. So it could, I'm sure there could be cases where that is reasonable to do a remote interview, and cases where there would be individual reasons not to do the remote interview, but to rather prefer, let's say, an in-person interview. And then you had specific case question on children as well. I'm not sure if Tanya or Lynn, if you want to fit in particular on considerations and conducting remote interviews with children. You want to feel like adding anything there?
I think not adding is just repeating. So you also always should consider if the best interest of the child is being considered. That is in favor of the child to be in a remote setting or not. Our most highly suggestion is not to conduct in these cases, but if you consider it that everything is in place and that you've secured the proper procedures, that you could do, but also be very careful to be in fairness of the procedure for the child.
Thanks. I hope that at least partially answers your question, Leo, and wasn't super detailed, but also since we didn't go into so much in the guide and the different types of, let's say, depending on the different type of asylum procedure.
Just if I cannot hear Daniel, in any case, if wants to organize an interview, I mean, as we say, in virtual or remote format, definitely there are tips that someone can use. I mean, the guide is publicly available. We focus on the personal interviews as they are defined in the legal framework that we explained, but definitely the ideas are there, and if you want to organize it in different contexts, let's say, about this, the interview that you described, definitely, I think there are very useful tips in any case. You can and be used for remote interviews.
So I shared the link as well to the guides on the EUAA website in case any of you didn't already have it. Then you can go straight to the guide as well and find it there on the public website of the agency. And as mentioned, there will be translations into a number of languages as well. And once those are available, they'll be also available on that same page.
So I don't see any other question or any either on the chat or with a raised hand. No. I guess in this case, slowly close the event, the session. Just to add, next to, as Jeroen said at the beginning, it will be available in our members area for the NCPs, and then they can use it to further disseminate the information about how to use the guide, about the main elements. Just to add that in case there is a specific interest in the guide, just I mentioned it, we can always organize something specific, related to a specific member state, like a workshop or a visit to discuss the guide in case that you would like to apply it in your national context and you would like some further support on this. And of course, we are always open to possible questions regarding the implementation. Otherwise, we'd like to thank you very much. I would like to thank also, as we said from the beginning, the colleagues, especially and the ones who participate in the beginning in this development, but a special thank to the ones that are here today and they helped us to organize this event. We hope that we raised your interest on this document, and we'll go to see a bit deeper how we can help you in your either organize, if we talk from the side of an administration of the process, organize this format, or in case that you're already have it in your context, that this can give you tips to deal better with the situation and the format of remote interviews. If no one wants to add anything, I would like to thank you again, and we're hoping to see you in a future event.